Good evening. I'm Sora Lee Cook, co-president of NCJW with Nancy Boyer, who could not be here. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for co-sponsoring this discussion tonight, and to Nazareth and Dr. Timothy Kneeland. I'd like to tell you about a couple of fun programs that are coming up for NCJW. On October 30th, we will be having a movie at the Jewish Community Center. We are co-sponsoring with the Jewish Community Center, The Law, and Karen Morris will do the Q&A after that. The movie is 5 p.m. Tickets are $8. November 13th, we will be taking a bus trip to Safe Haven in Oswego, New York, in the Holocaust Museum. The price is $75, but early bird special is $65. So we hope that you sign up for the trip. It should be a very, very interesting day. Thank you, and Ruth Skolarski.
Thank you, Sora Lee, and good evening, everyone. I am very pleased and honored to welcome Professor Timothy Kneeland as our guest and keynote presenter. Dr. Kneeland is Professor and Chair of History and Political Science and Director of the Center for Public History at Nazareth College. He has been teaching and writing on American national, state, and local politics for 3 decades and provides political analysis for local media. I hope you all tuned in to the Evan Dawson program earlier today on WXXI, where Professor Kneeland was among a panel of guests discussing down-ballot vote. Dr. Kneeland's publications include Studies of Presidents in Radio, Millard Fillmore, Franklin Roosevelt, and George H.W. Bush. He also recently completed a reference book on social policy differences between Democrats and Republicans. This was June of 2016. And has a study of Richard Nixon's natural disaster policy under consideration at Cornell University Press. Please join me now in giving Dr. Kneeland a warm welcome.
So here we are, just days away from the debate, and just weeks away from the election. An election, no doubt, that we've been told time and again is probably the most important election of our lifetime. Except maybe this time they're not kidding. Maybe this time we're talking about a new politics. Because I really think that what we're looking at with this election is maybe something different. Maybe not exactly the beginning of a new politics, but certainly the end maybe of old politics. We certainly have seen the destruction of the Clinton coalition of the 1990s, as many of Bill Clinton's policies have been pilloried by younger Democrats who have eschewed his ideas about approaching community policing, have questioned some of his ideas about don't ask, don't tell, and some other issues that in the 90s seemed pretty novel and seemed to be moving the line forward, now seem to a younger generation to be somewhat stagnant and perhaps part of the old order. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is certainly destroying that Reagan coalition that came together in the 1980s that consisted of social and cultural conservatives, evangelicals, some college-educated, middle-income, shall we say, establishment Republicans, and some working-class white Republicans who joined with Reagan as part of the Reagan Democrat movement. So certainly as we're going forward, Donald Trump is going to leave a lasting impression on the GOP, but this election may leave a lasting impression on the Democratic Party as well. So I think that's really what is fascinating about the election, because it's not just about a choice, although that's important. It's about what that choice can mean, and if we don't get people out to vote this year, it could have a down-ballot effect on the Senate, the House, even local races. I would be, I know you're here tonight, so I don't have to tell you, but you know, there is a county executive race going on, right? That seems to be, yeah, county clerk, I'm sorry. County clerk race. You would know, exactly. Yeah, Sandy would know that, right? But the point is that, you know, with all of this talk about the presidency, you know, we need to keep that in mind. Now, one of the interesting issues that may in fact be disaffecting the voters is the way we structure our election system. We have what we call winner take all, right? It's first past the post. You can win an election without a majority of votes. You can get 34, 35%. Donald Trump. You can win entire races that way, and you'll be the winner. This tends to keep the number of parties in any political system that has this limited, usually to two major parties, and that's what we have: the Democrats and Republicans. The problem is that if you look at the Democrats and Republicans, rather than compromise, which is what the majority of Americans would like to see, they have become more polarized. Certainly since the 1990s, polarization, as more and more Republicans see themselves as very conservative and more Democrats see themselves as very liberal. The middle seems to be leaving both those parties, and that has had an impact maybe on the way that people approach politics. Maybe they don't feel that they belong anymore. Certainly if you're liberal and progressive, you're very happy. And if you're socially, politically conservative, you're very happy. But there's a number of moderate potential voters out there that may in fact be being harmed by this. As we can see, if we look at party identification, and this just came out, the Pew Research Center just had a huge report on the state of the electorate. And it turns out that nationally, there are more people not enrolled in a major political party than are enrolled in a major political party. And what does that mean? Well, one of the outcomes of that is that it turns out that people don't tend to vote as frequently if they're not in a major political party. They're a lot more disconnected from the election, generally because only major political party candidates are running or have a chance to win. But they have low information. Political parties do a great job of giving information to their potential voters, making sure they reach out to those voters who are registered in their party, going door to door, trying to reach out to people and connect them back in. The problem is, what if you're a blank or some form of independent? That has a tendency to keep you at home. And more troubling than that is that many of these people are our next generation voters. Your 18 to 29-year-olds are not enrolling in the major political parties at the same rate as even people did in my generation back in the 1980s. And that can be very troubling. So that may be part of the new politics. People are upset, people have grievances, people feel disconnected, but they don't feel that there's a place for them in the political system as it exists. Some people think that this is going to be an interesting election because we might go a third way, that millennials in particular are loving third-party candidates. Jill Stein from the Green Party, or Gary Johnson, the Libertarian. Now the interesting thing is that Gary Johnson is a former Republican, and his running mate is a former Republican. Young people don't particularly like Republicans. That's just a fact. Not that there aren't young Republicans, but in general, they don't, but they are liking the Libertarian Party. And that may be taking votes away from Hillary. That, not less so from Donald Trump, more so from Hillary Clinton. That is going to be an interesting outcome because this could play a role in key states. Some of you remember some place called Florida in the year 2000. Yeah. Many people saw the Green Party as a spoiler, even beyond the ballot shenanigans that were going on down there, and it may have cost the presidential election. But as we think about what could possibly happen, right, in close races, in close states, it could deliver the election one way or another. Even though Democrats begin almost every election cycle, every presidential election cycle, certainly with an advantage. There are more states that are, if you will, pro-Democrat, than there are Republicans. There are more votes in those states. I find it impossible to believe that California is not going to vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016. I find it unbelievable that New York would not vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016. So that's an advantage that Democrats begin with as some of the biggest states. I also find it hard to believe that Texas would not vote Republican in 2016. So if we look at this, though, the other interesting criteria here is it turns out that when you look at it, that we don't see the same decline among third-party candidates that we've seen in other election cycles. Yes, we've had third-party candidates, but they haven't sustained the same interest and impact. And the interesting thing about that is, Gary Johnson's made a couple of, shall we say, faux pas. He didn't know where Aleppo was, okay? What it was, which if you're following an election, you would like to have the candidate be a little briefed on foreign policy. That might help a little bit. So that certainly you would think might undercut. But again, if we're talking about voters who have low information, that may not be as important or significant, right? Because they may be voting for the ideal, not the ideas. They might even be voting for the policies, not the person. So, as we think about what's happened just in the last 12 months, the last year, so many things have happened that have shaped this election. Elections don't happen in a vacuum. They happen because there are events surrounding the election that shape the way the candidates respond. So if we think about what's been happening, what are the top issues? Back in February, we had a nice Gallup survey, terrorism and national security for both Democrats and Republicans. And of course, right, we'd had the Paris attacks, we'd had San Bernardino, and so terrorism was on everyone's mind in a way that perhaps when Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump apparently were thinking about running for office, this was not going to be maybe the most significant. The economy, as we know, has been perhaps of concern to people, but maybe what people didn't understand going into this was just how desperate so many people felt. How they felt that they had been left behind. Or, because it turns out a lot of people that are voting on the economy are not actually in dire straits, but they have the fear that things are going to go badly. And so they're voting for the candidates they think they can do a better job. That explains Bernie Sanders, who came out of nowhere. He wasn't even a Democrat. He was an independent in the Senate. He was essentially, he's always been, shall we say, a socialist. And, he was able to capture the imagination, particularly of millennials. And then we think about the people that are voting for Donald Trump, many of whom, by the way, are registered as Democrats. And in open primaries, working class white males who do not have a college education, who are very scared about the future, and saw in Donald Trump the man on the white horse, the man that would lead them to safety. And then we've got employment and the jobs, which makes perfect sense as we talk about trade and commerce, right? We talk about Trans-Pacific, trade pact, and we're thinking this was a signature program of the Obama administration, but now both major party candidates have sort of repudiated it or suggested that it needs to be tweaked or it needs something. That's in part because people are fearful that free trade is not fair trade. That's unique because that was the essence of the Republican Party. Free trade, globalism. That was going to make the world a better place. That was Francis Fukuyama, right? The end of history. We're all going to come together. And then, of course, Healthcare and the Affordable Care Act. Now, we're already hearing rumblings that guess what? Now, this is not going to shock you, is it? That our healthcare costs are going to go up again this year, overall, as companies have negotiated with their suppliers of healthcare, and they've looked at, everyone's trying to do cost containment, cost savings, but it turns out that healthcare costs a lot of money, And a lot of places are going self-rating. So as they're doing that, these healthcare costs continue to rise. So people are concerned about that. And then you've got other issues that divide the Republicans and the Democrats. But really then, the political environment was set by how consistent both Democrats and Republicans felt about some of these key issues. It was kind of striking. Terrorism. This is a list of global, not just domestic, terror attacks from January to July of 2016. Did not include such things as the recent events in Minnesota, New York, New Jersey, nor Paris or San Bernardino would be included in this. But this is actually, somebody goes in and they look at everything that happens in any country that is related to a terror organization. This is a persistent issue. It is a security issue. It's an issue that we have to deal with. We have to figure out policies that will take people who feel marginalized and so desperate that they're willing to kill others, sometimes with a truck on Bastille Day, that this is more than just deciding that we're going to get rid of one organization or another, because it turns out there's a lot of these lone wolves. And these are individuals who, for a variety of reasons, often again, they come not from the working class, but a sort of lower middle class, or people who have angst. How do we deal with that? That has to be a policy concern. I'm not hearing that from both sides. The economic growth has been a problem. We were told after the Great Recession of 2008 that we were going to have this wonderful U-shaped recession. It was going to take time. There wasn't going to be this great rising. We were going to decline, and it was going to take years before we could get back. Now, interestingly though, like last week, we saw that real income rose a couple of $1,000s over the last 10. It was good. It was the biggest gain in years. But again, for people who've experienced this, that doesn't help them. I knew a lady growing up who lived through the Great Depression, and she used to hide food. Now, she didn't need to hide food, but she'd been raised in the Great Depression. And so that left a lasting impact upon her approach to the world around her. So for people that have lived through the last decade, no matter how good the economy gets, I don't know how secure they're going to feel for years to come. People who've lost their house or lost their jobs or just had some other economic dislocation. I'm sure many of you could lament with me after 2008 when you looked at, oh, there was my retirement. You know, it happens. But people don't take the long view all the time. Now, Gallup does this thing, they do a daily tracking poll that tells us a little bit day to day how, for example, is the real unemployment rate, which is more than just the standard unemployment rate, but looks at the number of factors, including the number of people who should be in the workforce who are not. Anyway, so they're saying the real unemployment rate is about 9.7%. Not shocking, not desperate, not really that bad, considering it was much higher before. Good jobs. That generally means people who are working at least 30 hours a week with a steady income. That's down a little bit on their daily tracking poll. People engaged at work, similar metric. Economic confidence is down a little bit. Consumer spending is up, and that's how much people spend every day. How much they expect to spend every day. So they do this mass survey. So it's up a couple of dollars. Now, that could be a good sign. It could be a healthy sign. It could mean that gas is going back up. There's a lot of reasons why that might change. And then, this is really interesting. Obama's approval rating is really good right now. 53% is terrific for a president at this point, the end of their second term, after all of the economic turmoil that people have been in. He's got a pretty solid approval rating. And that generally helps the incumbent party. But again, there seems to be some discontent within the Democratic Party. Healthcare. Again, what a surprise. We seem, as of May, to be completely split on our feelings about the healthcare plan. Obviously, Hillary Clinton is unhappy. She'd like to expand it. She'd like to do some more things to control costs, pharmaceutical and other things. Donald Trump says he wants to end it and start over again. no matter what happens, the healthcare program that we have is very likely to continue in some form or another. People like allowing pre-existing conditions. That's not going to go away. People have not now gotten used to having their children on their healthcare insurance until they're 26. That's not going to go away. There's a variety of policies that we could enact, but we're not going to see a lot of that. But interesting, this is where economics and healthcare come in together. U.S. adults, one of the highest concerns that they had in April was their healthcare costs. That they were worried that that was going to affect what they had to live on. And you hear it. You hear it from the solid middle class. People are going to high deductible plans, and they're rationing their own healthcare. And that, of course, is what you do when things cost more. And maybe we're paying the real price for that. But that's been a concern. Then lack of money, low wages, and some other things like that. We're in an age of social unrest. And you know, maybe historians 25 years from now will be writing about our time like they read about the 60s. It was a time of great change and upheaval. Because right now, we don't know how any of this is going to end, right? Like they did in the 60s. Like people in the 60s probably were going, man, I can't wait till Todd Gitlin writes a book about us, right? They're probably all, I just want to survive. I want to end the war. I want to do this. I want a better social justice world or something, right? But look, the Tea Party rose up in 2010. They did not like big government. They did not like high taxes. They wanted change. They wanted change that would affect their everyday lives. Occupy Wall Street, though, was the counterfoil to that in 2011. They wanted the big banks brought to their knees. They wanted people to pay. They wanted the 1% to pay for the excesses that led to the economic collapse. Inspired by economics, but not all. Black Lives Matter in 2013. Trayvon Martin, right? Think about that. Now, this has been a social movement that's in the news even as of today, as we look at what's going in Charlotte, North Carolina, right? There's things going on that are affecting the politics in ways we can't imagine. And demonstrations can either lead to change or it can lead to Richard Nixon. So that's the interesting thing. People get scared and they vote for the more authoritarian figure. So that's why we have to keep an eye on these and why this is a moving set of chess pieces. This is not an election. Nate Silver did not predict that this election 18 months ago, like he did in 2008, right? It became Nate Silver, the great genius, 538, and he puts this all together. And yeah, and then of course the fight for 15, the minimum wage issue. Notice how all of these are both economic, but also about a kind of just society. Embedded in this is a frustration that the country's not going in the right direction. That is what's driving this election. It's not pocketbook issues exactly. The pocketbook is the expression, but it's also, my pocketbook is being affected because the policies aren't fair. Be you on one side or the other. So, the election begins, and these are all the fine candidates for the Democratic Party. Aren't they handsome? Yes. Yes. And most of them ineffective. So it came down to two, fairly quickly, actually. Hillary Clinton, who had incredible experience. I dare say that when people say she is the most experienced candidate to run for president in modern politics, I would agree. She has been First Lady of the United States, which is an office that carries with it great responsibility. Right? This is not, I don't even know, pre-Eleanor Roosevelt. She was a U.S. Senator from this state. She was Secretary of State. She knows foreign policy. She knows domestic policy. But her opponent, who took it right to the threshold of the convention, and she needed a little boost from the party leaders and elected officials or superdelegates, has less experience. He lives in Vermont, which I love Vermont. but Vermont and Maine are one of the, shall we say, whitest states in the Union. There are, what, 600,000 people in Vermont? I think most of them live in Burlington, which means most of them are probably college students. Right? True story, skating capital of the world. You want to go, get your skateboards out and go up to Burlington. So he was a representative in the House, which meant in Vermont he was the one representative. Right? That's all they get. And then he was a senator. But again, he was an independent who caucused with the Democrats. True story. People did not eat with him in the Senate dining room. They did not like him. Because, as you probably found out, he gives the same speech again and again and again and again. Right? So, he's a great guy to talk to once. And then you're like, I heard that. Right? And I'm not knocking him. He's going to start an organization, and he's going to continue to persist with his ideas. He drew the Democratic Party further left, which is probably what needed to happen, because I think Clinton's game plan was, look, this is how my husband did it. We, triangulated, left, right, we found the center. That worked in the 90s. I'm not sure with the new politics that's going to work. I think you need to address some of these desperate calls for change. Again, I'm not saying one side or the other. Look, we're a 501c here. We don't support anything. So, but I think if politics is to work, it has to listen to both voters, but also citizens who, for one reason or another, feel marginalized and are not in the system. That, I think, is a danger to democracy, when people don't participate. So we need to somehow draw people in. Clinton voters, Sanders voters. She continues to have a problem with young voters and white males who formerly supported the Democratic Party. And yes, look, I teach, among other things, American women's history here. I understand misogyny. I get it, right? I mean, if you look at the history of America, I understand that there's probably some, shall we say, unfairness. Somebody was talking, I think it was on NPR today, in the debate, speech specialist, and they're like, well, Donald Trump needs to not say anything outrageous, and Hillary needs to moderate her tone. Because when a woman raises her voice, and this is not fair, see, that's me saying not fair, don't believe in it, but it does have a negative effect on listeners. And the reality is then that you have a sexist system that we have not yet, we're working on it slowly, but hopefully surely. So there is some of that going on. So what is she going to do? She wisely is going to try to deal with it. And then you had, this is bigger than, my gosh, this is bigger than a pitching force at MLB right now. There's 17 candidates. 17 candidates, 3 of whom, we're not exactly, shall we say, politicians. Trump being the chief of all, right? I mean, George Pataki. Some of you probably know him. He's a lovely man, I'm sure. But even as governor, he put people to sleep. Right? I don't know why he thought he was the guy that was going to come charge again. But there, it quickly got down to 3, which almost represented the establishment Republicans, the evangelical conservative Republicans, and then the sort of white working class Republicans. But clearly Trump did well with white males, no college education, lower middle class, not necessarily always working class, registered Democrats who vote like Republicans, Southerners, independents, and people who want an outsider to run the country. We all have studied it, we've all heard it. Calvin Coolidge said, the business of America is business. This idea that somehow businessmen are going to run the country more effectively has been in our domestic belief system for centuries. Crucially wealthy evangelicals, college educated and older, married Republican women, and John Kasich with moderates. Here's the problem. Going into Iowa and New Hampshire, we can see it right away. Look at the 18 to 29-year-olds. But even so, and this is the thing that you guys might take a little surprise in. Donald Trump does really well with millennials. They like his refreshing candor. See how he did that? Refreshing candor. His blunt talk, his anti-PC language, his dislike of speech codes, and that appeals to young people who go on Tumblr and they read about microaggression. But they don't even understand it yet. And they feel somewhat discombobulated and not sure what to do. So I think a number of people, you're going to be surprised at some of the exit polling on election day for Donald Trump. Because the narrative we keep hearing is it's going to be these older white males, like the same people that came out for Ross Perot in the 90s, or like Pat Buchanan back in the day. But I think there's more to that. So this is why I think we got a new politics going on. Look, back since 1980, which some of you weren't born then. But 1980 is sort of the watershed election because that was the election that brought Ronald Reagan to power. That even, people like Sean Willents, who's absolutely left of center, have called the age of Reagan, the age of conservatism, the end of an eclipse of the liberal social order that had been put together by FDR and sort of reached its zenith with Lyndon Johnson, had slowly been fading, and now the age of Reagan. And every time you have any event that the Republicans do, they bring out Reagan. Reagan this and Reagan that. But, since 1980, it was endorsements. Who's endorsed Donald Trump? Chris Christie? Chris Collins? The congressman from Buffalo? The Bushes wouldn't even go to the convention. 2 living presidents. 110 Republicans have repudiated him. Many senators suddenly said, oh, is that what the convention? I didn't know, I have something to do. I mean, not only did he not get endorsements, people didn't want to be seen with him. And yet, he got the nomination. So endorsements, which used to play such a critical role in sort of bringing a character reference to candidates, that's out the window. Because many people know you're fired. They saw him on TV.